Mary and I fell in love. We went everywhere together. Her children became the sunshine of my life. In 6 months, we had sold her house in Los Angeles and moved to a small mountain town above Palm Springs. She bought a cabin there, and we became Mountain John and Gypsy Lady. Had it not been for the introduction of marijuana, cocaine, quaaludes, and tequila, we might still be there. I wanted to experience every part of life that was possible. When I lived in Oklahoma with Carla, there was a lot of guilt and anger brought on by religion and jealousy, and here in California, that was all removed. Carla and I did well if we had sex once a year. Mary and I had sex sometimes 2 and 3 times a day. We were always oohing and awing at the sunrise and sunset of each day. We held hands, laughed, walked on beaches, and talked about everything. Nothing from fantasies to fears went unspoken. We truly believed we were the new Adam and Eve. I wrote poetry all the time. My music became stronger as my eyes were open to the Southern California's open ways of thinking. Nothing was wrong. Everything I felt, said, or did was relevant to something in my aura that needed to be openly expressed. I became an observer of the mundane society that existed outside of my Garden of Eden. It was all right to build up my energy and aura to the point of overfill so I could go forth into the society and observe and give my gift, as long as I returned by the time I needed to refill my tank. The world outside can consume and drain your ability to stay within the positive flow. Without the proper amount of positive energy, you cannot function in the society that exists outside the walls of the garden. This way of thinking is fine, but if you add drugs, alcohol, and free sex to that equation, you will eventually come up with paranoia and schizophrenia. California in the 60s and 70s invented both of those psychological malfunctions. Unfortunately, many good people were lost along the way. I had to leave the garden eventually. I had to find a way of filling my aura through the positive energies of my own gift and talent. If you give, you shall receive. I decided the road would become my garden and my music and poetry would be the fruit of my labors. I wandered down the mountainside into the land of sunshine, palm trees, sand, and golf courses. I started singing from Indio to Los Angeles. I recited my own poetry and sang my own songs. I still entwined the old folk music of my youth between the stories of how I wrote my own material. Stories turned to humor. Poetry turned to tragedy. Original songs turned to romance and sincerity. All of the moods and emotions of humanness were exposed on stage each night, and my career was evolving faster than Darwin's theory. Mountain John was becoming the entertainer of the rich and the shameless folks of Palm Springs and Los Angeles. One Tuesday night I was singing one more John Denver song, and the evening was slow. Bartender Jim was bored. Claire, the waitress, was bitching about her bill, and Frank, the local drunk, was at the corner of the bar, and he was nursing another beer. The door to the bar opened up, and in came a man who looked more like Errol Flynn than Robin Hood did. He sat at the bar and ordered a drink. Jimmy smiled and motioned for me to take a break. I wandered over to the bar area, and Jimmy introduced me to Tim Nally. Jimmy introduced me as Mountain John, and Tim laughed and stuck out his hand and said, "Printing press, Tim." We all laughed. A man with a dream was before me. A dream had fallen into his hands from a dying friend of his that was named Jim Ambrose. Tim had been in the printing business for quite a few years, and his beautiful Australian wife, Maureen, and 2 lovely daughters, Alexandra and Rebecca, and their miniature poodle, Dee Dee, lived in a small, inexpensive neighborhood in Palm Desert. I sang in a bar called Sunshine Meat, Fish, and Liquor Company. Jimmy Shea was the bartender, and the bar set down the highway from Tim's printing shop. Jim Ambrose and his brother Joe had gone to Alaska in the 40s. They discovered gold 250 miles north of Fairbanks, Alaska, on the banks of the Hammond River. Ambrose told Tim the story years later. Tim had dreamed of the lure of gold for years, and so far it had been just a dream. Jim Ambrose and his brother Joe came back to the lower 48 without getting the gold out. Between the war and permafrost, they came home with hopes of going back someday. Someday turned into wives and families and businesses. Joe died and Jim grew old. One day Tim's phone rang, and it was Jim Ambrose. Ambrose was dying and asked to see Tim. On his deathbed, he gave a hand-drawn map to print and press Tim. That night, Tim laid the map out on the bar for bartender Jim and I to see. I'd heard of gold fever and read many a poem by Robert Service about the Yukon gold rush. Right before my eyes a dream was sparked, and a slow burning fire was lit in the hearts of Tim Nally and Jimmy Shea. I may have been Robert Service in my past life. I may have been Daniel Boone. I might have been Stephen Foster. But one thing was sure. I was now Mountain John, a troubadour, songwriter, storyteller, and poet. As Tim and Jim's dream unfolded during the months that passed, so did mine. I was sitting down in the desert swapping jokes with a friend of mine named Bartender Jim, and one night a fellow walked in that looked like Errol Flynn, and everyone around there called him Print and Press Tim. I could tell by the look in his eye he'd been struck by the fever that had made other men die. Now I'm the sort that likes to sit and snort and sing songs and travel all around, but Tim is the kind that dreams of gold mines and digging holes in the cold Yukon ground. Not too long ago he got a letter about gold from a friend of his up Alaska way. He said, "Print and Press Tim, it's time to trade it all in. Get yourself a good running truck, son, and a few $100, 'cause I've already staked out the claim." Now listen close. I ain't telling a joke. It's a true story about a good friend of mine, and if you think it gets boring and you fall asleep and you start snoring, you're gonna miss out on a hell of a find. Tim sat down and ordered a drink and started talking real low and slow, and we all listened and watched as he pulled out a hand-drawn map and showed us right where he was fixing to go. "Way up north, past the Arctic Circle, where few men have ever survived. An X marked the spot where an old cabin stood, and not far away was the mark for the gold mine. An old drunk by the name of Frank Clark said, 'Hell, Tim, you'd have to be crazy to go up there. There ain't no way you'd ever last. Why, at 40 below and 75 foot of snow, in 5 minutes you'd freeze your skinny young Southern California ass.' Tim took a big drink, and he shot back a big grin, and he said, 'Frank Clark, who gives a shit?' He said, 'Hell, I'll give it all up, and I have nothing left just to go up yonder and clear my mind a bit.' He said, 'I'm going, by God. I've seen enough of these hot desert nights, and I've got me a dream of digging a gold mine down by a stream and seeing them northern lights, where the rivers are frozen clean down to hell and the wolves could eat a man whole, and where there ain't no rattlers and there ain't no sand, just snow and plenty of gold. Where the nights last all winter, and even though you stand there and shiver, you could hear a man breathing for 5 miles away. You know you gotta have nerve and be 95% insane to want to go up there and stay.' Well, that, my friends, is Yukon Tim, who gave his printing company back to the Southern California banks and left the hot desert nights on the 1st of July in an old beat-up 1954 primer grade 4-wheel drive Dodge Army ambulance. And I wish him good luck as I throw down a buck and I order another cold beer. And next spring, when he returns with money to burn, we'll probably all still be sitting right here. He'll tell us his tales of the kind of jails a man can create in his mind on a cold Yukon night when you're so full of fright that there ain't no gold in your gold mine. It tell us all of the beginning of fall when darkness covers the land and the northern lights shine down so bright on the soul of a lonely gold-mining man. Now me and my friend, old bartender Jim, we both sat there in that bar and heard that story that night, and we watched Printing Press Tim turn into Yukon Tim, and then I sang him a song that I knew all about the northern lights. I hope you listen as I sing you the tune that's always been his request, 'cause whenever I sang it, he always remarked, "Hell, Mountain John, I like that one the best."